Welcome to another episode of Inside the Mavs. Kevin Gray, Mavs insider for 105 through the Fan, joined as always by my partner, Grant Afseth of Mavs SI. Another edition of Inside the Mavs, just a few days away from the NBA draft. Really appreciate you joining us. However, and wherever you may be listening to us, whether it be on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts for free. You can also check this out on YouTube as well, on my YouTube channel at Kevin Gray Sports. Make sure you subscribe. They're also subscribed to Grant's channel as well on YouTube. Really excited about our guest today. It's a busy time for this young man as he's getting ready for the NBA draft on Thursday. And of course, we got a lot of Mavs notes to get to. You can find him on Twitter at Kevin O'Connor NBA, writer for The Ringer, does a terrific podcast, The Mismatch, and of course, host of Beyond the Arc on FanDuel TV. Kevin O'Connor joining us on Inside the Mavs. Kev, what's going on?
I'm doing great today, guys. How are you doing?
Doing well. Appreciate that. By the way, informally called you Kev. Didn't mean to do that, but if you're cool with that, I just dropped that in there.
Kev's great. Kevin's great. I mean, yeah, I love the Kev. One syllable, easy nickname. You feel the same, Kevin?
That's right. That's right. Exactly. So again, we appreciate you taking the time with us. Before we jump into anything Mavs, obviously, as we're recording this on Father's Day, the Suns were like, well, damn the CBA. We're going to go get ourselves a third star, and decided to go get Bradley Beal. What was your just initial reaction to what the Suns did and what that means collectively for the West and for the NBA, given what they decided to do?
My initial reaction was, well, I guess Beal, Booker, and Durant, a lot of overlapping qualities, probably diminishing returns here. However, the reality is at the end of the day, there's nothing better the Suns could have gotten for Chris Paul, who has zero value league-wide, or Landry Shamet, who is not a good basketball player. And they got Bradley Beal, who's top 40, top 50 player, regardless of how you feel about him, if he's overpaid or not. The Suns got better. They took the Nuggets to 6 games, and this makes them a better team, and they're not yet done this offseason. They're still going to try to make moves to improve further and flesh out this roster. So I like it for the Suns a lot, especially when you add in, they got Jordan Goodwin, who is pretty good off the bench and like a defensive, tough, on-ball role for the Wizards. He can be that point guard off the bench for the Suns.
Yeah, definitely. In terms of how it impacts the West, the Suns were a team that many were kind of watching as like kind of a dark horse, for Kyrie Irving. Not that it was like the most feasible option, but in terms of now, like looking ahead to the draft, what do you think about the market that kind of for Kyrie in general, as you kind of like look at how that trade kind of unfolded?
I wouldn't expect the Suns to be a destination any longer for Kyrie Irving. It just doesn't make sense for that team at this point. But I still wonder about, a team like the Lakers, if they could try to flip a D-Lo in a sign and trade scenario. Other than that, I don't think there's many destinations for Kyrie aside from Dallas. Dallas seems like the strong favorite to retain him at this point. But, I mean, we'll see. Surprising things have always happened. For Dallas, they're in a position with the 10th pick. They're, trying to shop that around and see what they can get. So the Mavs are certainly willing to shuffle the roster around. But I'd expect Kyrie Irving to be back and be part of that future.
What are you hearing the latest when it comes to this Mavericks team, given a lot of things that they're trying to thread a needle with the number 10 overall pick, trying to get some veteran help maybe? What are some of the things that have piqued your interest with this team as we approach the NBA draft?
Yeah, so I think for them, it's that 10th pick is going to be interesting because that's everything you're hearing right now. What are they going to do with 10? I don't think they're going to necessarily get a great return for a player for 10. I think something that's more realistic would be, say, with a trade down with the Utah Jazz, get 16 and 28, something like that. So then the Mavericks could add 2 players on rookie deals or keep one of those picks and move the other. The 10th pick at this point, it just doesn't seem like it has a ton of value other than a trade down, which I personally think, for Dallas, this year's draft class at number 10, yes, you could get a higher upside player on paper, but for the Mavericks, you got Luka making all that money. You got Kyrie, if you re-sign him, making a ton of money. It would make sense to surround those guys with some quality role players on rookie contracts. We see Christian Brown for the Nuggets and getting minutes in the finals. This year's draft class has a ton of guys in the middle to late first round and the early second round that I think are going to be early contributors. And so for a team like Dallas, it makes a heck of a lot of sense for them to move down if that type of deal is on the table for them.
Are there any prospects in that like 20 to 30 range, or even like that 16 to 20 range that kind of stand out in particular as a potential like instant impact option similar to Christian Braun with the Nuggets?
I think Colby Jones, he's the first guy that pops into my mind as you asked me that, Grant, because he's an upperclassman. He's a junior. He's a type of guy. He can play off ball with Luka and Kyrie. He can hit spot up threes at a solid level. Tough defender, and he's kind of that connective glue piece. Like he doesn't need the ball in his hands to make the right pass. He just makes rapid, sudden decisions, and he's a good defender. With him, I think his spot up shooting is unproven. It wasn't until his junior season that he started shooting very well off the catch. So if pre-draft workouts go well for him, he'd be a higher confidence selection. But other than that, I think, guys like Chris Murray, another upperclassman out of Iowa, Jaime Jaquez, someone from UCLA, a senior, similar to Colby Jones in terms of like being a connective piece, Max Lewis. There's a lot of guys up and down the board. Julian Strawther from Gonzaga that, would make sense for Dallas as somebody that they feel can come right in as an upperclassman and make a difference.
When you look at this number 10 overall pick and what they are attempting to do here, if let's say they keep the pick, who is a guy, whether it be Hendricks, maybe Derek Lively, who is for you that ideal number 10 pick given some of the needs that the Mavericks are trying to address this offseason?
I mean, you said it, Kev. It's Taylor Hendricks. Hendricks, he could come right in. He's a near 40% shooter off the catch. He's an intelligent player without the ball. You can have him as a cutter, a mover. In high school, he played center. And granted, his at-rim finishing numbers weren't, spectacular. His freshman year at UCF, I think he's a better finisher than the numbers showed because of the difficulty in some of the layups that he was taking kind of away from the basket. It was something that he had to do. Luka would get him shots at the rim, lobs, dunk opportunities. I think his numbers would skyrocket with a point guard, a creator like him. And defensively, I mean, like Dallas badly need somebody like Hendricks who can defend multiple possessions and protect the rim as a weak side help, shot blocker. Hendricks just checks so many boxes for what Dallas needs. And even though, a ton of people have him top 10 on their boards, like draft value wise, I don't know if he makes sense for Utah at 9. They got Lauri Markkanen and Walker Kessler already. Washington at 8. They just traded Beal. Wouldn't they want to go with a higher upside guy like a Anthony Black? Indiana at 7. I don't see them going in that direction. I don't think he goes top 6. So Hendricks feels like a guy that could very well be there at 10 for Dallas, even though a lot of people have him above 10 on their boards. I'm not sure the fit is there in that kind of 6 to 9 range, meaning he could be the one who slides to 10 for the Mavs. So who knows? Maybe staying at 10 is the best decision for Dallas.
In terms of like, in that similar idea, defense and rebounding will be priorities, to improve, as we've been mentioning. Do you see that staying at 10, Taylor Hendricks falling and being available as maybe that best fix to get started in improving those areas? Or are there any other ideas that you see as being like more like fitting plans for a win now team?
I think with Hendricks, he's, I don't think he's going to be the type of guy who's like your enforcer as a rebounder necessarily. You still need, he's only 6'8", 214 pounds. Even though he's long and versatile, you still need somebody who's that traditional big for you at that spot. And even with Derek Lively, the other guy you had mentioned earlier, Kev, like I think Lively, he's 7'1", but he's not necessarily that big, beefy, tough rebounder. I think with either of those guys, you still need more, rebounders, whether it's by committee with wings and guards that are crashing the boards alongside a big. So if it's not Hendricks at 10, I'd really want to be trading down there. There's just not another lone prospect that makes a ton of sense for the Mavs at that 10 spot that I don't think they couldn't also get at 16, like just that Utah example again. If it's 16 and 28, you can still get a really good prospect at 16, and you can get somebody at 28 that can play, that you hope can play right away as well. It's a tough spot though. I mean, like maybe taking a swing isn't the worst case scenario. Sometimes guys who are up under, who are freshmen or sophomores come in and you think they're raw, but then they perform right away. So whether it's an Anthony Black or, a Cason Wallace or Grady Dick, a Jalen Hood-Schifino, add another a big ball handler type into that rotation. I see the logic. I just prefer a trade down.
I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm kind of on that trade down train, and a team that likes to play ball with Dallas that we've seen in the past historically. Atlanta doesn't mind, playing along with Dallas when it comes to trades. And a guy for me that solves some of those issues would be a guy like Clint Capella. I know they got a decision to make between him and Akwamu and what they want to do with him going forward. Is that a realistic scenario? Could you see whether they swap 10 and 15, maybe bring Clint Capella along? There's been reports about maybe John Collins being a part of that. Which one of those Hawks, if you're playing ball with Dallas, would you want to see happen if they're trying to make a move there?
I think that's a smart idea. You move down, if you can move down 5 spots and get a big, whether it's Collins or Clint Capella, I think either of them makes sense. Atlanta's definitely been in a lot of discussions involving the 15th pick. I've heard like them in talks with Boston and trade down or trade out scenarios. Toronto, they've been involved in a lot of different conversations with teams, and I have not heard Dallas directly personally, but like on paper it makes a lot of sense. And sometimes a team that you're not hearing about is actually the team that is the most realistic. So sometimes silence ends up being louder. So I think it just makes a lot of sense on paper, because you get an NBA ready player, a guy who's proven in Capella or Collins, and you still get a good pick. Atlanta gets to trade up and get the guy, whoever it is that they're targeting, maybe a Bilal Coulibaly, pair him, next to Trae Young and DeJounte Murray. I think it makes sense for both sides, but Atlanta is in a position where I wouldn't be shocked if they don't make a deal until during the draft, because they're shuffling, they're dealing with so much right now.
In terms of a potential like trade down with other teams, are there any other veterans that you see as being logical like trade targets for Dallas to move down from 10 to acquire in a trade?
I think in that general draft range, so you get Atlanta at 15, probably not with Utah at 16. I don't see the Lakers as a match. I don't think the Heat are a match. The Warriors, I don't see them as a match in terms of players. Houston at 20. I'm not I've heard they want to trade out of the 20th pick. Would they want to trade up to 10? But even then, I'm not sure they have that veteran player that necessarily makes sense for the Mavericks to flip in a deal. So, as you kind of go down the board team by team, there's really not a great fit. Maybe it's moving back 1 spot with Orlando. Something like that, where it's a very minor deal where you get like an additional asset or a young player in addition to moving down 1 spot. But in that kind of 15, aside from Atlanta, that 15 to 22, 23 range, there's not a lot. Like, would you want to move down from 10 to 23 to get, I don't know, like Nurkic from Portland? I don't think so, right? Like, no,
not feeling that one. Not necessarily. No. I mean, good player, sure, good dude. Not necessarily feeling that. I just want to, moving down to make that pick there. But I do want to ask you this real quick, because we've talked about some of the future when it comes to this roster. I want to ask you about a player that's not expected to be back with this team, and just get your thought on it. Why, in your opinion, didn't this work with Christian Wood in Dallas? There we go.
I like Christian Wood, so I've liked Christian Wood since he was with the Pistons. That was the year I was like, oh yeah, Christian Wood's starting to figure it out, and he's gotten better since then. I don't know why it didn't work necessarily with Jason Kidd. Obviously there's theories out there about why his minutes were fluctuating throughout the course of the season, up and down, starting, coming off the bench, playing 30 minutes per game to playing 15 minutes per game. There's a lot of theories about that financially for why Dallas would do that. But ultimately, I like Christian Wood still. I know he's an inconsistent defender. I know he makes some goofy decisions on the floor, but there are not many players in that, I like to say, the Brook Lopez mold. How many guys are there that can that are 7 feet tall or about 7 feet tall that can protect the rim, block shots, and space the floor from three. There's not many at all. There's just not. There's Kristaps Porzingis.
I'm about to say there was one that used to play in Dallas.
Right? Yeah, he used to have him. There's KP. There's Victor Wembanyama coming in. There's not a lot of guys. Like if you really want to go move down the totem pole, like a Zach Collins with the Spurs, like there's not a lot of guys that fit that mold even very loosely. So I like Christian Wood, and I look forward to seeing where he goes. I thought Dallas would be the ideal spot. It wasn't. Maybe it's the next team where he, finally lands in a role that makes perfect sense for him. But yeah, I mean, do you guys feel that he's kind of unfulfilled potential, or are you kind of happy to see him go? Where are Mavs fans feeling about him right now?
I think it's a very mixed bag for sure.
Yes,
it's like
very mixed.
Yeah, there's people who wanted him like with Dwight Powell starting. There was always debates about who's the right one to start, who needs to get the bench role. And yeah, I just think they were a very flawed roster, and when your options at your disposal were what they had, it's very challenging to necessarily have a clear-cut answer, because there's a lot of drawbacks to either option is kind of my thought.
Especially when they use the first round pick to go get him and moving on to
like at least like my whole thought with it was like, if you're going to spend the asset and you're already limited on the assets, you might as well give it an extended stretch where you're truly evaluating whether that's like a ceiling raiser for you before it's like the trade deadline that passes and then you're stuck with the free agency kind of looming. I feel like that until injuries happen, there wasn't a real like extended look, and then the hand injury, then it kind of just disappeared. So it's just, definitely was a weird situation for sure.
As you kind of look into this crystal ball of the Mavericks, Kevin, when you look at what they've got asset-wise, what they're trying to do with this 10 pick in free agency as well, we're anticipating Kyrie coming back. What do you see in trying to look over the next couple of years with what they're trying to do, especially with Luka on this quote-unquote timeline of, the next couple of years, what that could look like for him? What does this team have to do to get back to where they were during their Western Conference final run a couple of years ago?
I mean, they pretty much have to reshape the entire roster around Luka and Kyrie at this point. And I mean, whether it's going out to get Draymond and a sign and trade with the Warriors, they need a lot of help, across the roster. Like they need wings, they need bigs. With Kyrie Irving, who knows how often he'll play? They very well might need guards. I think for Dallas, I know Luka is one of the best young talents in all of the NBA. He has MVP potential, and maybe we have yet to see the best from Luka. But like that roster that he went to the Western Conference Finals with and led is not the roster that they have today. And I'm not super optimistic about the Mavericks' future at this current moment. But this offseason, maybe this is where they kind of change my mind about how they can build around Luka in the years to come. How creative are they going to get? How aggressive are they going to be for sign and trade scenarios? So far, most of everything that they've done has just not worked. Other than Luka and Jalen Brunson leading that team to the Western Conference Finals.
Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, for sure. And when kind of reflecting on this last season, the Christian Wood situation was an odd one, but what were there like kind of anything else that stands out to you as like, things that maybe in like hindsight could have been done differently or handled differently? Like I know in particular there was like, Jaden Hardy, Josh Green, they were kind of reluctant to give them kind of expanded roles early on until injuries kind of, forced them a little bit to do that. Was there anything like that maybe you feel could have been done differently, or do you think the roster was kind of just, I guess in a way, doomed with a lower ceiling than kind of originally expected?
I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head there. The roster was probably doomed anyway. But like just to bring this back to Christian Wood, I still am confused on what actually happened there. I mean, he had his, 15, 20 game stretch or however long it was in the middle of the season where he's averaging 23, 24 points per game, shooting almost 40% from three, grabbing 10 rebounds per game, and looking like, oh, wow, this is everything we hoped Kristaps Porzingis would be. And then what happened to that? He gets out, he gets hurt, he misses games, and then he comes back and he doesn't play over 30 minutes per game much at all the rest of the season. He just seemed like he was in Jason Kidd's doghouse in favor of JaVale McGee earlier in the year, in favor of Dwight Powell at certain points of the year, when I thought Christian Wood should have been a 35-minute per game player, sharing the court with Luka as much as humanly possible. And that didn't happen. And I think that might have screwed up the relationship there. And now they need to figure out how to replace the guy that they traded a first-round pick for, as you said, Grant. They're just running out of assets. They're running out of flexibility. They're running out of options. The next couple of weeks here for Dallas are absolutely critical in defining how the next 4 years, you hope, are gonna go with Luka. It might not be that long. Could be as soon as next summer, where you start hearing those serious, those whispers become, shouting and screaming that he wants a change. And that's not what you want to happen with a guy who's an MVP candidate in his mid-20s.
And it's funny, you kind of led me into one of my final questions for you, which is this the most consequential offseason for this franchise, given what has to be done, how much has to be done, and what that means for the next 5 to 7 years when it comes to Luka, who's already a four-time, first team All NBA selection? Would you say that this is kind of the most consequential offseason as of the Luka era right now for the Mavericks?
Yeah, without a doubt. And that's, in terms of what moves the Mavericks can make. It's also in terms of how Luka himself invests in his body and gets in the best possible shape of his life. And I know that's unfair to say for a guy who's averaged 28, 9, and 8 over his career and has been an all-star every season. The guy's unbelievable, but there's still another level for him to reach. He can still be better defensively. He can still be even better as a three-point shooter. There's more ways for him to improve. If he's playing with Kyrie and they add more, ball movers and guys who can create off the dribble, there's still ways for him to tap into what we saw when he was playing overseas prior to entering the NBA as an off-ball mover. So I think this is a big summer for him as well, to look in the mirror and say, hey, as amazing as I already am, how can I be even more legendary? And I think this in many ways, it's about the players and it's about the front office with what they do. And then it comes down to Jason Kidd. How does he, operate with whatever roster that he's given? He was dealt a tough hand last year, to be fair. But I thought he could have done a better job in a lot of ways. So this is a massive offseason. If they flunk this offseason, I think, by next summer, you'll hear that stuff about Luka. Whether they would move him or not, I'm doubtful. Like, I'm sure the Mavericks would play hardball and say, hey, we're not trading you. You have 2 years plus a player option left in your contract. We're going to make this work. Give us time. And then maybe they go crazy next summer and make big changes. But at this point, other than their limited future assets, which do have value, but they're limited, there's just I just look forward to seeing how creative they get. We just saw the Suns make a creative move getting Bradley Beal. What can the Mavericks do to build on the foundation that they already have? It is 100% the biggest offseason they've had, for sure.
Another way to improve, obviously, is like player development with the, your young players getting better.
Yes.
With Josh Green and Jaden Hardy being pretty, important young players for the Mavs. What have you seen from them so far in their development, and what would you like to see going forward as they, add to their game or expand on things this offseason?
I really like Jaden Hardy. I mean, maybe in a backcourt with Kyrie, they're a bit undersized, which also speaks to the importance of adding more wings and a big rim protecting center. But I like Hardy. I think the flashes he showed as a scorer, both in the G League for Dallas and with his limited opportunities, playing heavier minutes for the Mavs. Like what was it? Like Portland? I think Portland or something like that, where he had his big 25, 30 point game. I mean, Hardy's a bucket getter, man, and having him as a spark plug off your bench is a nice guy to have alongside Luka and Kyrie, especially if Kyrie misses any time. He can kind of slide into playing heavier minutes. And Josh Green's solid. I never loved him in the draft. I thought he was an okay prospect, and as long as he can sustain the shooting progress that we saw last season, obviously it's been a very up and down stretch for him. Even last year, he had his moments where he was ice cold, but he shot 40% from three. If he can sustain that, that makes you feel really good about what he can be long term in the NBA, because he brings the hustle. He brings some of those intangible qualities that you look for. 6'5", 6'6", whatever he was listed at. Lots to like with Josh Green. I feel a lot better about him now after his third year than I did entering the draft when he was drafted 18, 19 by Dallas a couple years ago.
Yeah, for sure.
Along those lines, because you talk about player development, the collective bargaining agreement is kind of forcing these teams, unless you're the Suns, who just took a blowtorch to their future for the next 5 years, that you have to build younger. Is Jason Kidd the right man to lead this franchise, given the direction that the NBA is going in this roster that he's going to be working with, however it's comprised moving forward here?
Probably not. But I mean, this is again, like, we're talking about what's the front office going to do? What's Luka going to do? Well, Jason Kidd, he can reevaluate who he is and his approach as well. And I think for Kidd, obviously, I'm not sure how much credit he necessarily deserves for the usage of Giannis in Milwaukee. That felt like it was a given that it was going that path with how they wanted to develop him and how Giannis was developing himself, regardless of the coach. But I mean, he did kind of put the ball in Giannis's hands. He, did empower him. So he has like a little bit of a track record of doing well with younger players. So I think for Kidd, this is probably the year he's going to have to prove it. Otherwise, I would think, Dallas would make a change next offseason or during the season. But I mean, because they got some good assistant coaches as well. Like Sweeney, he's a guy who's been kind of on the bubble of some interviews for other head coaching jobs. I'm not sure he's quite there yet. But they have some talented coaches on that staff that I could see Mark Cuban sliding over into the head coaching job if things don't go well with Kidd. But we'll see. I mean, this is a big year for him. And sometimes you want to believe in these coaches who are great players. Like, Kidd is one of the most cerebral playmaking guards that we've seen in the last 20, 30 years. So I think with him, maybe this is the year he figures it out as well. How important is the coach if he doesn't have the roster? Like that's the difficult thing here. Like Grant's right. Like, development needs to happen from the young guys. That's not all in the coach. The front office needs to make the right moves. That's not all in the coach. So as much blame as Kidd might receive for, this decision or that decision or how he handled this guy's minutes or whatever, what are you supposed to do if you have that roster? And ultimately, to me, I tend to always, when it comes to looking at teams, I always look at the front office first and foremost. And what is Nico Harrison and Mark Cuban, who ultimately is the decision maker for the Mavs, what are they going to do to build this roster out? That to me is the number one question facing the franchise moving forward, more so than anything else.
One thing that I'm curious about, the Mavericks still have to replace some of their departed assistant coaches, and they still need a lead assistant with Greg St. Jean going to Phoenix. Are there any experienced options that kind of stand out to you? Because it seems like a lot of the names they were linked to are now off the board, aside from Jeff Hornacek and Jeff Van Gundy.
Not off the top of my head. I think Van Gundy was the one that kind of came to mind. I forget who reported it a couple weeks ago, but they said Van Gundy could be a candidate to take a lead assistant job. For Van Gundy, he's been out of the league for so long at this point. Maybe that is necessary for him to take the leap to becoming an NBA head coach again. So Dallas could make some sense. I could see that on paper, but I'm not so sure he's going to leave that comfortable, broadcasting job next to Mike Breen and Mark Jackson.
For sure. I wouldn't personally.
I wouldn't either. I wouldn't either. Before we let you go here, just before this NBA draft for this Mavericks team, what would your message be to fans who are looking at this team with either trepidation or with some kind of hope about what can happen over the next few weeks, given all the things that this team is trying to do? What message would you give the Mavs fans? Like, hey, look out for this, or look, be aware of this. What would you say to that?
The pressure's on. This is an urgent time, and the decisions made by Mark Cuban, Nico Harrison, the Mavs front office are going to determine whether you got Luka for a very long career with Dallas, following Dirk Nowitzki, or if this is kind of the LeBron James first stint in Cleveland path where maybe you were too good too soon and things accelerated too quickly with, trading draft picks, getting Kristaps Porzingis, and it all leads to ultimately him leaving for another city, possibly taking his talents to South Beach via trade rather than free agency. I just think this is an urgent time. And if I were a Mavs fan, I would be panicked. But I would also say, okay, we got one of the 5 best players in basketball. There are not many teams that can say that. And anytime you have a top 5 player in basketball, things can turn around so quick. And I think with Dallas, that's the place I'd be in, where it's like, I'm panicked because of the stakes that we have with Luka. It's not the worst place to be. There are much worse places to be, and that is a lot of teams that don't have a top 5 talent. So I'd be nervous yet optimistic for considering the player that they have with Luka.
Kevin, tell the folks so they can find you and the work you got going on these days, man.
People can find my stuff all on Twitter. I send it all out at Kevin O'Connor NBA, or check out The Ringer. We got our own YouTube page, and we got Spotify. We upload all our stuff on there as well. The Mismatch, Ringer's NBA Draft Show, Beyond the Arc. I'm doing too much stuff right now. It's all hard to find. Just check out my Twitter feed. It's all sent out there. That's where it's all aggregated.
Hey, look, that's a thing these days for sure. But look, man, this has been terrific. Really appreciate your time. Again, we know that you got a busy schedule, and we really appreciate you taking some time with us here on Inside the Mavs. A lot of great stuff here, and looking forward to your coverage over the next few days. And hopefully you'll find some rest in between now and then, so that you can continue to do what you got going on before NBA free agency hits here in a couple of weeks, man.
Thank you so much, guys. Keep up the great work, and hope to see you at Summer League.
Appreciate it. That is it for this episode of Inside the Mavs. Again, make sure you follow Kevin's work all over Twitter at Kevin O'Connor NBA. Does terrific work for The Ringer and all of his work there. You can find Grant on Twitter at Grant Abseth. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports, covering all things for your Dallas Mavericks. We've got a lot more to get to throughout the course of the week, heading up into the NBA draft on Thursday. Again, make sure you download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts for free. Write a 5-star rating, give it a 5-star rating, write a review for it. And you can download it wherever you get your podcast for free. For Kevin, for Grant, and for me, Kevin, I guess. We'll talk to you later on Inside the Mavs. Peace.